Alright, welcome back to yet another tutorial on the River Canyon. This one is going to focus a bit more on what do you do after you've rendered the perfect canyon or mountain scene landscape, and that is perhaps how to add a nice looking sky with some seemingly combination. Looks like there's 2 layers or 3 layers of clouds. There's a couple of tricks here, and you know, we need to kind of composite that and make it look credible, so, and looking good. So I mean, there's also one thing, of course, to blur it a little bit with the the lens flares here. You could put a light here somewhere, and you always want to make sure it kind of matches somewhat where the light actually is based on the shading that you had on the 3D rendering, right? You don't want the sun here when this part is being lit by the sun, unless you're on a planet with 2 suns. So there's usually a red giant there. So let's put something like this here, red giant on the left, kind of a blue new one on the right side here. But anyway, we want to see how do you work this when you have initially no background, no sky. It might be blue. This one I had it kind of an orangey color, and that might be a bit difficult to just pick the color, because you have perhaps some parts of the terrains, like the rock levels here, that are at similar hue, similar color. So how to actually first of all create this kind of sky, and then where to place it, and how to make sure it only appears up here where the sky place is. So one thing that you may remember is that there are a number of things you can export from the 3D render, and here are some of them. There's the elevation map that has been modified by the erosion, so you can see the erosion trails, the gullies or creeks or valleys. There's also sediment deposits, so there are some parts that are kind of filling in. And then there's actually also the ability to export the erosion map itself. There's also here an exported color map. We could use that to perhaps give more definition, more detail to the rocks, to make it look like there are some sediment layers or stratified layers, strata. And the same thing with the green. We might want to add some more detail to make it more interesting, like bumpy little details, look like rocks or grass, trees, that sort of things. Short of actually painting them right in there, you know. It's a paint program after all. So we could do a lot more. Same with the snow parts. Maybe put a little cabin there somewhere on a flat, beautiful vista point, or put some snow trails there. You know, maybe the skiing slope trails. So there's a lot more work that could be done on that. But what I want to focus on is when we have this rendering. This one here, I think, is the same. We have an area that hasn't been rendered, and that's the background sky. I mean, it was rendered, but just with the plain color. And what I'd like to do is see how to composite something else like this, and then perhaps also talk about how to create this in the first place. But let's first look at just compositing that. One thing you can do is you can put this one in the main. I'm actually on the swap image right now. Let's switch back. So I'm going to put this one here in the main image, and then I'm going to switch to the swap image and put this one in there. Right now, this could be a photograph, or this could be something that we rendered. In fact, this one was rendered also in 3D Designer. So you can use 3D Designer to create a terrain. You can also use it to create some fancy clouds. And we've shown some other tutorials back in the days of version 8.2 how to create some of these. So here, you know, really easy actually. You need to select this sky, which is in this case a uniform color. So there's a couple of ways to select it. There's a magic wand. You can just click that. And right now I'm not showing the marching ants. That's a selection option here, marching ants. Now I can see it. But you can also show the overlay alpha. And what that does is it turns pink anything that is not selected. And what is selected will stay at its original color. So I recommend that when you have a lot of detail. It's also very useful perhaps to see them both. And this marching ant is not just a do or nothing, it's a transition line where it goes from non-selected to fully selected at 50%. It's actually not just a all or nothing flag. There's a 8-bit value. The alpha channel is 8-bit deep, and so what that the marching line represents is where the transition is. And you can tell that if you, for instance, blur it with, let's say, Gaussian blur alpha, you can see that there is a bit of a pink progression here, and the line is no longer exactly along the horizon here, or the shape of the mountain, because it's now representing the 50% cutoff or demarcation line where it's 50% selected. Here it's fully selected on the inside, outside here it's fully non-selected, and somewhere in between is where the transition is of 50%. Now what we'll do is we'll go to that fully selected on the background sky and maybe do a little bit of a blurring. So when you zoom in here, you can see the marching ants are exactly on that line here, and you might want to give it a little bit tolerance there. So perhaps blur that a tiny little bit with the box filter, just a tiny little bit, like by 1 or 2 pixels. In fact, you can show here what it does with the alpha overlay, but you can also show it. You can show the alpha as a grayscale. And so this will give you a little bit of margin, because we want to not have too much of a crisp transition. We want to have a little bit of a progressive transition to the background sky. So because you won't notice it, but it will look better when you zoom back out. So now at this point, how do we put that sky in here, right? I mean, we have the sky loaded in the other image. It's back there. Let me store the alpha quick. This is going to be an important piece. So the selection mask we can store right there, and there it is, right? And that way, if I clear it, right, and later I want to put it back in place to composite things only through that sky region, I can replace it right there. Place it back in. So now again, the tinting here, the pink or purple tinting, reveals that part is not selected, whereas the sky maintained its own color. So I mean, I want to have this. You could possibly put some renders here, like rendering a sky right there, and see that sky there. But this is not a very fancy sky. It's okay for some, but it's not the best there is. So one thing we'd like to do actually is instead work on that sky. If I clear the alpha here on the swap image, you can see that I have this sky that was created in 3D Designer, but it might be a photograph, it might be something you painted, it might be something really sophisticated, but now it's time to place it somewhere where it's going to do some good when we composite it into this scene. Right, so let's go, and perhaps one thing we need to do is just bring it up a little bit higher, right? Because we see this one here, the sky is around up here, that's where the horizon is against this mountain. So what you may want to do is bring this up a little bit if you want to see more of this nice pink lower far distance area. So use those filters like the shift, transform shift, and just bring it up a notch. If you accidentally go sideways, you see this thing here on the left, just bring this here, Shift X back to 0, so it's only shifting it vertically. You can actually do that right here numerically. But the key thing is that you don't want to go too high. So one thing I'd recommend now is to actually bring that alpha channel in, replace, excuse me, oh, I need to get out of this here. So let's replace the alpha so you can see what is the shape of the mountain. Here, this is the skyline, if you want, or the transition from the mountain to the sky background. So that tells you how high you can bring this without without revealing the end or the bottom of the sky image. So let's go shift it, and you can see now that you can shift that image, and down here is where the lowest point is, so you'll want to go down here like so. Again, make sure the Shift X is 0 so there is no transition to the side. And if for some reason you also want to shift it a little bit sideways, one thing you could do is actually not just do the shift, there's also a general transform. which allows you to shift it around like that, but also allows you to rotate it. And sometimes that's useful if there's a part that you really prefer at a slight angle, and scale it. That's the other thing too. So there's quite a number of ways to make this work and appear the way you want it. I think I liked the one I had a little bit earlier there, this one. And so I'd like to use that one and composite it back into this scene. Right, so this guy here we will get rid of. Let's just say no, you go away. Right. So how do we replace that with the upper part of this image? The one at the bottom here is going to stay masked off with the alpha channel, right? We have that here. So that one is going to leave the mountain, but this one at the top here is where the sky comes in. So what we want to do is basically filter or transfer or combine the two. We have the main image and we have the swap image, and we want the swap image only the top part here and the main image only the bottom part. Well, that's exactly selected by the alpha channel here, by the selection mask that's currently in place here. So what you do is you put one here in the sky with the upper image that you want, and you don't care, you don't worry about the bottom. It's not going to affect us. And then same thing here, we keep the bottom, and the top one is the one that's selected, so we can now use the filter and combine the two, combine with swap. Right, so I'm on the main image here. I'm going to go combine with swap and mix the two buffers. Now normally you have it all the way here at 0, so it's showing only the main image, but as you transition here it shows more and more of the swap image, and then you simply go to the maximum 255 for an 8-bit value. That's 100% showing the pixels coming from the actual swap image. The sky, the mountain scene down here was not affected because it was fully protected by the alpha channel saying that it's not selected. And so that's how you can composite quite easily two images into one. Right. I mean, it's not the only way, but that's a fairly straightforward way, and it uses the alpha channel to let you control actually what parts of it really are to be combined and how. Not only how, but where. So that's that, and then once you have that, you can clear the alpha, and now you have the combination of the two here. Right. So let's see how to actually create not the terrain. We've seen so many tutorials on how to do that. Let's again get a reminder on how to create the sky. Right. So when I created this sky here, it was a little bit lower. I shifted it up, made sure it was still within the region of where I would not see the bottom appear above the mountain, and then combined that. But how do I create this sky in the first place? There's many different ways, but this is the one that I like to show. So let's go render a plasma noise. Oh wait, and I still have some sort of a combination or something here masking. Let's go clear alpha. I don't want to combine things. Let's just clear the entire thing here. Okay, so let's see. Oh, I was probably in a render mode. Plasma noise has a couple of different, yeah, it was in difference mode. So let's keep it in opaque mode for that. And you can see, you know, something like that will be useful. Don't give it too much detail, don't make it too big. 7 or something like that is a good start. So we have this plasma noise. Let me mask away these guys here or hide them. So we want to turn this image into something like this. Right? And clearly there is some perspective distortion, but there's also some coloring or lighting, and that's exactly the magic there. So let's go and turn this into the 3D designer. So this, yeah, the same tool, and you see it remembers the parameters I had. So I'm going to gradually undo these. You can see if I turn this around, the sky turns around like that. If I change the lighting angle, that will create some nice different mood. And there's 2 light sources. So you can work with these to create some really interesting looking skies. Now, why is this a sky? Because we tilted it downward. We're looking at the terrain from the bottom. If you look at it the normal way, it would be like this, right? So the pitch here, you can use to see it as a terrain. The amplitude also is very low. If you make it more like the default value, this is the terrain. Now, why is it blue, showing the background color here? That's because of the fog. So I have ground fog. And the ground fog has an upper area here and a lower area, and you work with both to kind of reveal some of the background sky, but not too much of it. And so that's pretty much the trick about that, is that there is a combination of background fog, there is flattening of the terrain, so it does show a little bit of shading, but not too much. You don't use the shade, the ray traced shading, like the soft shadows. You don't do that. Although that's perhaps something yet again that might be interesting as well. But you do want to have this really soft there. I typically work without the ray trace, and so let's say I want to have a sky that has a very strong wide angle look. I need to get the camera zoom here. I want the sky to have kind of a purple or magenta look, so vermilion or something like that. You'd set those colors, and then as you bring the altitude of the light down, you'll see that it's going to apparently shine on these clouds, and not on all of them here. So that's kind of part of the trick. You can also zoom in a little bit or zoom out. The blue sky is too bright here. Let's get this one back here, zoom that around, turn it around. Now we need to perhaps make it wider on the X, on the Z, rotate this, give the heading something like this. There you go. So you can see there's a lot of different ways to work with this. Now let's bring back this fog trick here. The fog level, that's a distance fog. Probably not. Well, we could use that too for a little bit of fog effect in the distance here, towards the horizon. Remember, we need to flip this upside down too. So there it is. Here's our sky. We want to add a little bit of ground fog. That's perhaps too much. So we can adjust here how much of that fog on the ground is actually affecting the sky, the cloud pattern opacity, so to speak. So here we can adjust the light source, number 2. You could give that a different color, maybe an orangey color, and maybe the moon is out there somewhere, but it's a lunar eclipse and it's a blood moon. So you could use that to, or have both of these, the magenta-ish colors and then the more orange, brighter color out here. So many different. Look at that. So different. So many different skies to produce with just a few of these sliders moving around. And so I wanted to show you that you can create some pretty interesting looking skies with that. And so let's say, for instance, we settle on not this. Let's see, where do we want to settle on that? Yeah, something like that, I suppose. So this would be a good one if we have the sun setting in the lower right, because that's where the shining on the clouds is happening. And so let's say we render that, and we now have the sky. And so that basically, first thing you'll want to do is store that. If it's a good one that we don't want to lose ever, then you'll want to save it. So here are now two different skies, very different skies, produced though by the same ideas, some sort of a pattern of a noise, and then perspective projection or rendered as a 3D.